Speaker, I come before you today to move a motion for the approval of the budget statement and economic policy of the government of Ghana for the year ending 31st December 2021. Right Honorable Speaker, let me at the very outset express my profound gratitude to the President for the trust and confidence reposed in me in designating me as the Minister with temporary responsibility for the Ministry of Finance. In these past 5 days, I have received massive cooperation and indeed guidance from His Excellency, the Vice President, the head of the Economic Management Team, Mr. Charles Adubuaheng, the President's representative at the Ministry of Finance, and the Minister-designate for Finance, Mr. Ken Ufuriata, from far away United States of America, the technical team at the Ministry of Finance. May I also thank my colleague ministers and members of Parliament for the expression of good wishes and support. Let me also speak on this momentous occasion, wish the First Lady of the Republic happiest birthday for attaining the biblical optimum age of 70. Today, Friday, the 12th of March. Speaker, to Mrs. Osei Kyei-Mensah-Bonsu, let me just say, what can I do without you? Speaker, colleagues, I want to believe.
Honorable Minister, is it an invitation for her to come and stand by you?
Mr. Speaker, you know that she is a stranger in this house, and our rules will not permit her to stand by me. Otherwise, I know I will have the permission of the minority leader, in whom I'm sometimes well pleased to be by my side. The Speaker, I was saying that I want to believe that the facts of the majority leader in the government business, one of our own, presenting the budget statement in this House, should provide sufficient mitigation to subdue the flame of heckling from the professional hecklers. That's why they know themselves. And I know one is pointing at me now. Right, Honorable Speaker, honorable members of Parliament, on the authority of His Excellency the President Nana Dankwa Akufo-Addo, I beg to move that this Honorable House approves the financial policy of the Government of Ghana for the year ending 31st December 2021. On the authority of His Excellency the President, in accordance with Articles 179 and 180 of the 1992 Republican Constitution, permit me to present to this august House the budget of the President of the Republic of Ghana. Speaker, this statement is an abridged version of the 2021 budget statement, and I would like to request the Hazard Department to deem the entirety of the budget statement and economic policy as having been read and capture same in the Hazard of today, Friday, the 12th March 2021, upon my completion of this submission. The Speaker also submit to this august House the following statutory reports. The 2020 annual report on the petroleum funds, in accordance with Section 48 of the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, 2011, Act 815 as amended, the 2020 report on the utilization of the African Union levies, and third, the 2020 annual debt report in accordance with Section 72 of the Public Financial Management Act 2016, Act 921. Mr. Speaker, on 28th of October 2020, and in accordance with Article 180 of the 1992 Constitution, government laid the expenditure in advance of appropriation in this House. I wish to report that the subsequent approval of those estimates by this august House has made it possible for government business and public services delivery to continue uninterrupted in the first quarter of 2021. Speaker, just 3 days ago, on the 9th of March 2021, His Excellency, the President of the Republic, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, presented the first message on the state of the nation of his second term. In that address, he clearly stated that even though, like other countries around the world, we've had to go through the worst possible pandemic of our lifetime, the nation is in relative good state, thanks to the grace of God and to the swift, decisive, responsible, and necessary actions taken by government to contain the virus, support families, and sustain the economy. Today, Mr. Speaker, I stand here on behalf of the President to present to you and the House the state of the economy, how we have managed to mitigate and survive the pandemic, and eke out a projected positive growth rate of 0.9% in 2020, contrary to the initial fears of a negative growth rate as experienced in many countries. I will also present to you deliberate and well thought out strategies that will hasten our recovery and place us on a confident path of sustained economic transformation. Mr. Speaker, the year 2020 was a difficult period for Ghana and the rest of the world. Never before in recent history has a pandemic triggered such dramatic changes to lives and livelihoods simultaneously. The last of such pandemic of global impact was the Spanish flu in 1918, over 100 years ago. The ensuing crisis has disrupted supply chains and exerted undue pressure on economic and financial systems, killed businesses and jobs. Developing and emerging economies, including Ghana, have had to deal with external headwinds, falling commodity prices, and rising expenditures to address the effects of the pandemic. The International Monetary Fund has estimated that the global economy contracted by 3.5%, while global trade also contracted by 9.6%. The COVID-19 pandemic has upended the economies of over 150 countries and is the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression in the 1930s. Speaker, for the first time in our 64 years of nationhood, the government has had to tackle an unforgiving simultaneous health and economic crisis. The outbreak and the ensuing partial lockdown on businesses, and to facilitate a quick and strong recovery of our economy, which we aim to achieve through Ghana Cares, or Batampa program. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that expenditure on health infrastructure and health-related items such as vaccines, hospital supplies, and PPEs would become a routine. However, we will take measures to ensure that these additional critical expenditures do not undermine our fiscal consolidation and debt sustainability. Government will pursue revenue-enhancing measures with a focus on deepening our digitization agenda, both on transactions of goods and services, as well as on the tax collection systems, to broaden the tax base and rope in more eligible taxpayers. Expenditures will be rationalized through the implementation of tighter expenditure control systems to ensure value for money. We will also pursue structural reforms in public financial management system to improve efficiency in public service delivery. Mr. Speaker, we believe that achievements in the 3 years prior to the COVID-19 outbreak, as well as the intermediate outcomes of the EPRP and CAP, are the foundations from which we will collectively adapt to the changes caused by this pandemic and, quote, build back better and greener, unquote. Speaker, the seminal breakthroughs in vaccine development gives hope that the economy can reopen more quickly than anticipated. However, logistical challenges in access and administration of vaccines and the continued mutation and emergence of more infectious variants of the virus may further delay the resumption of full economic activities around the world. Mr. Speaker, in line with the President's determination to protect the lives of Ghanaians, we have prioritized the vaccination program against COVID-19. Through the bold leadership and adept diplomacy of His Excellency the President, Ghana became the first country in the world to receive its first batch of vaccines of the 600,000 doses through the COVAX initiative on Wednesday, the 24th February 2021. We are also working assiduously to secure vaccine for 20 million Ghanaians to enable us to attain herd immunity by the end of this year. Once again, Ghana has stepped up in front. Thanks to His Excellency the President's leadership, we are championing African excellence to become the vanguard against COVID-19 on this continent. However, Speaker, until we achieve herd immunity, we cannot let our guard down if we are to contain the spread of this virus. We must all commit to taking vaccines in addition to adhering to the COVID-19 protocols that have been instituted for our safety and gradual return to full economic activities, recovering for sustained transformation. Speaker, in addition to continuing our priority programs, we will implement additional initiatives to drive recovery. These include: 1, scale up the vaccination of Ghanaians to enable us to attain herd immunity in Ghana by the end of 2021. Continue the implementation of Agenda 111 to provide hospitals and related infrastructure nationwide to improve the delivery of health care. 3, intensify efforts to improve public sanitation. 4, support to those who have lost their jobs due to COVID-19 to find other gainful employment opportunities. 5, deploying resources for our security agencies to maintain peace and security. Complete many of our ongoing infrastructure projects within our resource envelope, reflecting the theme of the budget. The implementation of the Ghana Cares program to revitalize the economy and create employment. And 8, continue the implementation of our flagship programs, including planning for food and jobs and the One District, One Factory agenda, plus the One Village, One Dam agenda. Mr. Speaker, the last 4 years left no Ghanaian in doubt that ours is a government that cares. We care about the welfare of the people. We care about the need for business to create wealth. The next 4 years will see a more clinical structural focus on President Akufo-Addo's transformation agenda as we build with deliberate gains so far made. In this regard, pursuing the 100 billion Ghana Cares or Batampa program, which by far is the boldest and biggest economic recovery program in the country's history, will enable us to turn the challenges created by COVID-19 into opportunities for socio-economic transformation. This program will foster closer collaboration with the Ghanaian private sector, labor, the people, our development partners, and foreign investors. The Obatampa program is inspired by His Excellency the President's conviction that, and I quote, what our forebears dreamed of, we will achieve. If we inherited dreams and visions from our founding fathers, we should leave legacies of achievement and realities to our children and their children, unquote. Mr. Speaker, through Ghana Cares, we will, 1, expedite government's digitalization, greater efficiency and effectiveness in public service delivery. We will revitalize the housing and construction industry to address the severe housing deficit and create job opportunities, and establish Ghana as a regional hub, leveraging its position within ECOWAS and as host of the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area to focus on manufacturing, financial services, education, healthcare, aviation and logistics, digital services, petroleum, automobile, tourism, hospitality, and creative arts. It supports the private sector and entrepreneurs to become a powerful engine for job creation. Actively promote both local and international investments, including the use of PPPs, and upgrade the skills of our workers through retraining programs focusing on technical and vocational skills. Mr. Speaker, the implementation arrangements for the Ghana Cash programs are in place. Clear budgets have been set and milestones developed. We will establish delivery units in the relevant MDAs and partner with the private sector, academia, and other practitioners to facilitate and monitor implementation. There will also be regular institutional arrangements to ensure we achieve synergies and track results on a timely basis. Speaker, the theme for the 2021 budget is completion, consolidation, and continuation. This theme is underpinned by the fact that over the years, every new budget invariably contains a host of new projects to be initiated at the expense of ongoing projects. Not only does this put pressure on our finances, but also has historically resulted in arrears, with many contractors not being paid on time for work done, and thereby escalating the overall cost of these projects. Speaker, government has therefore decided to chart a new direction from 2021. A major concern of all Ghanaians across the political divide is the usually wasteful specter of uncompleted public projects scattered across the country. This must stop. Governments owe the people a duty to use limited public funds responsibly. Our goal is to bring to an end the culture of unfinished projects. The main focus of government for this year, therefore, is the fulfillment of existing commitment and the completion to the largest extent possible of existing projects. The delivery tracker, which government launched last year to track progress of infrastructure projects, showed over 8,700 ongoing projects across all sectors at the end of 2020. And that is why the President has tasked his ministers and heads of all other relevant institutions to focus the infrastructural energies of government mainly on continuing and, if possible, completing existing projects in 2021. The era of abandoning viable projects started with public funds must end. And this time we believe, and the time we believe is now. Mr. Speaker, I now proceed to give highlights of the budget. Global economic developments and outlook. Growth. Speaker, data from the IMF's January 2021 World Economic Outlook update indicates that the global economy is projected to grow at 5.5% in 2021, up from the estimated contraction of 3.5% in 2020. The 2021 growth estimates reflects an expected positive turnaround on account of COVID-19 vaccine-powered economic activity and strong policy response in advanced countries. Speaker, despite expectations for global economic recovery between 2021 and 2022, output gaps are not expected to close until after 2022. Consistent with this expectation, inflation is projected to remain subdued during the 2021-2022 years. For advanced economies, inflation is projected to increase from a low of 0.7% in 2020 to 1.3% in 2021 and further 1.5% in 2022 in consonance with increasing prices of medical supplies and those other commodities. Mr. Speaker, data from the January 2021 edition of the International Monetary Fund World Economic Outlook project Brent crude oil prices to average 50.03 United States dollars for 2021 and 48.82 United States dollars for 2022. Gold, as a safe haven, benefited immensely from the pandemic in 2020. This was sustained by continued monetary easing by major central banks. However, in 2021, gold prices are expected to reduce to an average of 1,740 United States dollars per troy ounce from an average of 1,793 United States dollars per troy ounce recorded in 2020. World market cocoa price averaged 2,369.85 United States dollars per metric ton in 2020, compared with 2,340.74 metric tons in 2019. Cocoa price is expected to gain a 1.6% increase in price and improve to 2,407.77 United States dollars in 2021. Financing conditions. Mr. Speaker, global financing conditions remain generally favorable throughout 2020, reflecting significant policy support which reduced lower borrowing costs, boosted equity valuations, enhanced investor risk appetite, and narrowed sovereign bond spreads across emerging markets and developing economies. These developments helped ease pressures on emerging and frontier market currencies, while sovereign risk spreads for most sub-Saharan African countries declined steadily in the year. Financial market indicators point to optimism about immediate-term prospects. However, Mr. Speaker, rising debt levels and increasing interest burdens across several emerging markets and developing economies pose significant financing risks in the short term. Domestic microeconomic performance for 2020. Mr. Speaker, to put the assessment of the performance of the economy for the year 2020 in perspective, we'd like to recap the macroeconomic targets set for 2020 as presented in the 2020 media review as follows. A, overall real GDP growth rate was revised from 6.8% to 0.9%. The overall non-oil real GDP growth rate was revised from 6.7% to 1.6%. C, end period December inflation was revised from 8% to 11.1%. D, overall budget deficit measured on cash basis was revised from 4.7% of GDP to 11% of GDP. Primary balance was revised from a surplus of 0.8% to a deficit of 4.6% of GDP. And F, end period December stocks of gross international reserves to cover not less than 3.5 months of imports of goods and services. Mr. Speaker, even though complete 2020 gross domestic product data has not yet been released by the Ghana Statistical Service, provisional data for the first 3 quarters of 2020 show that the targets for most of the macroeconomic indicators are largely on track. A summary of this performance is as follows. Speaker, average overall real GDP growth for the first 3 quarters of 2020 was 0.2%, compared with 6.0% for the same period in 2019. The projected outlook for 2020 is 0.9%, reflecting the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Non-oil real GDP grew at an average of 0.4% in the first 3 quarters of 2020. The projected out 6%. End period inflation was 10.4% in December 2020, compared to the revised target of 11.0%. The overall budget deficit on cash basis was 11.7% of GDP, excluding financial sector cleanup costs, against a revised target of 11.4% of GDP. The primary balance recorded a deficit of 5.3% of GDP against a target deficit of 4.6% of GDP. Gross international reserves accumulated to $8.6 United States billion, the equivalent of 4.1 months of import cover, slightly above target. The Speaker, detailed performance in the real monetary, external, and fiscal sectors of the economy are provided below. The Speaker, provisional estimates from Ghana Statistical Service show that average overall GDP for 2020 grew at 4.9% in quarter 1, negative 3.2% in quarter 2, and negative 1.1% in quarter 3, bringing the average GDP growth rate for the period to 0.2%, reflecting mainly the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the economy, as I've already related to. The most recent work on GDP post-2020 projected GDP growth outlook at 0.9%. In terms of sectoral performance, the agricultural sector grew at an average of 4.5% in the first 3 quarters of 2020, followed by the services sector at 1.9%, while the industry sector contracted by 3.1% over the period. Mr. Speaker, price developments within the year were largely driven by volatile food prices, while non-food inflation remained fairly stable. Headline inflation rose sharply from 7.9% in December 2019 to 11.4% in July 2020. The upward trend was mainly driven by panic buying episodes preceding the COVID-19 partial lockdown measure, which exerted significant pressures on food prices. However, with the gradual lifting of restrictions, the food price pressures eased and headline inflation steadily declined to 10.4% at the end of December 2020. Monetary aggregates and credits. Speaker, developments in the monetary sector during the year 2020 broadly showed increased pace of growth in all monetary aggregates, reflecting improved liquidity conditions in the economy. This was underpinned by supportive monetary and fiscal policies implemented to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Provisional data on monetary aggregates at the end of December 2020 showed that broad money, including foreign currency deposits, grew on year-on-year basis by 29.6% compared to 21.7% in December 2019. Annual growth in banks' outstanding credit decreased in December 2020 relative to what was recorded in the corresponding period in 2019. The nominal annual growth of outstanding credit slowed from 23.9% in December 2019 to 5.8% in December 2020. Similarly, nominal growth in credit to the private sector slowed from 18.0% in 2019 relative to 10.6% in December 2020. In real terms, annual growth of outstanding credit to the private sector moderated from 9.39% both in December 2019 to 0.17% in December 2020. Interest rates. Speaker, interest rates in the money market generally trended downwards in 2020 on year-on-year basis in line with the monetary policy rates. The 91-day and 182-day Treasury bill rates declined to 14.08% and 14.13% respectively in December 2020 from 14.69% and 15.15% in December 2019. Similarly, the rate on the 364-day instrument decreased to 16.98% from 17.88% in the same comparative period. The rates on secondary bond markets have also broadly declined, except rates on the 5-year and 7-year bonds, which increased by 35 basis points and 425 basis points to settle at 19.85% and 20.50% respectively. The weighted average interbank rate declined from 15.2% to 13.56%, resulting in improved liquidity conditions on the interbank market and increased trading among banks. Average lending rates of banks also declined to 21.10% in December 2020 from 23.59% recorded in corresponding period of 2019. External sector. Mr. Speaker, the external sector performance was also impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic through the trade and financial channels. The trade account recorded a low surplus of $2.0 billion United States dollars, or 3.0% of GDP in 2020, compared with $2.3 billion United States dollars, equivalent to 3.4% of GDP in 2019. The decline in the surplus was driven largely by a 7.8% contraction in total export receipts, especially from crude oil exports, which declined sharply by 35.2%. In addition, the value of total imports contracted by 7.3%, reflecting a slowdown in import demand due to the pandemic. The lower trade surplus, coupled with higher services outflows, resulted in a current account deficit of $2.0 United States billion, equivalent to 3.0% of GDP in 2020, compared to a deficit of $1.9 United States billion, equivalent to 2.8% of GDP in 2019. These developments, Mr. Speaker, resulted in an overall balance of payments deficit of $630 million United States dollars in 2020, compared with a surplus of $1.3 billion United States dollars in 2019. The deficit balance of payments was on account of marginal worsening of the current account deficit and a decreased net capital inflow account. Gross international reserves. Mr. Speaker, gross international reserves stood at $8.6 billion United States dollars, equivalent to 4.1 months of import cover at the end of December 2020, from a stock position of $8.4 billion, equivalent to 4.0 months import cover as of December 2019. Exchange rate development. The foreign exchange market was relatively stable and local currency performed better in 2020 than in 2019. Pressures from corporate demand, energy-related forex demand, and pandemic-induced portfolio outflows were offset by improved forex inflows, mainly from the Eurobond issuance and the IMF Rapid Credit Facility. These were complemented by the substantial reserve buildup by the Bank of Ghana at the end of 2019. Cumulatively, Mr. Speaker, the Ghana cedi depreciated against the United States dollar, the pound sterling, the euro by 3.9%, 7.1%, and 12.1% respectively. This compares with the larger depreciation rates of 12.9%, 15.7%, and 11.2% for the United States dollar, pound sterling, and euro, respectively, during the same period in 2019. It is worth noting that the depreciation of the Ghana cedi against the US dollar in 2020 is the lowest recorded in the Fourth Republic, notwithstanding the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, it is worth noting, since my colleague, the Honorable Atiforsin, is beckoning me to state that the depreciation of Ghana cedi against the United States dollar in 2020 is the lowest recorded in the Fourth Republic, notwithstanding the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, the 2020 fiscal policy objectives were adversely affected by the outbreak of the 2019 pandemic, which resulted in the recalibration of the 2020 fiscal framework during 2020 mid-year fiscal policy review to accommodate the unanticipated shocks and enable Ghana government to implement policies and programs to ensure that both lives and livelihoods were protected. Mr. Speaker, total revenues and grants was revised downwards by 13.4 billion to reflect the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on revenues, while total expenditures were revised upwards by 11.8 billion to accommodate COVID-19 related expenditures, resulting in revised budget deficits of 11.4% of GDP for 2020. Mr. Speaker, the unprecedented impact imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic led to the suspension of the set of fiscal responsibility rules for the 2020 financial year in accordance with Section 3, Sub 1 of the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018, Act 9A2. Despite the adverse impact of the pandemic on the Ghanaian economy, especially in the first half of the year, implementation of the 2020 revised budget was largely on track. The provisional data of government's fiscal operations from January to December 2020 indicate that total revenue and grants exceeded the revised target of 2.7%, amounting to 55.12 billion, while total expenditures, including arrears clearance, amounted to 100.052 million, exceeding programmed expenditures by 2.4%. The consequent modest increase in total expenditures, despite the force majeure imposed by COVID-19 induced expenditures, is a clear indication that government adopted prudent expenditure management measures over the period. Mr. Speaker, the above revenue and expenditure performance resulted in an overall fiscal deficit of 11.7% of GDP, excluding the financial sector cleanup cost. Speaker, and let me repeat, that the above revenue and expenditure performance resulted in an overall fiscal deficit of 11.7% of GDP, and that excludes the financial sector cleanup cost, compared to the program deficit of 11.4% of GDP. The corresponding primary balance for the period was also a deficit of 5.3% of GDP, compared with the revised deficit target of 4.6% of GDP. The fiscal deficits, including the financial sector cost for 2020, is 13.7% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, the fiscal deficit was financed from both domestic and external sources. Given the tightness of the external financing conditions, government had to resort more to domestic financing, including drawdown in government deposits at the central bank, domestic market operations, and other sources of domestic financing. Net domestic financing amounted to 44.889 billion, equivalent to 11.7% of GDP. Net foreign financing amounted to 31 million against a target of 18.46 billion, or 4.8% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, petroleum liftings and receipts. Total crude oil production for 2020 was 66.9 million barrels, compared to 71.4 million barrels in 2019. As of December 2020, the Ghana National Petroleum Corporation had lifted 12 parcels of crude oil on behalf of states and transported 88.418 million standard cubic feet of gas to Ghana National Gas Company, GNDC. Total petroleum receipts, that's proceeds from liftings and other petroleum receipts, as at end 2020, amounted to $666.4 million United States dollars, equivalent to 3.8 billion Ghana cedis, compared with the receipt of $937.6 million United States dollars, equivalent to 4.9 billion Ghana cedis in the same period for 2019.